100 Reasons to Avoid the Student Loan Program. Straitjacket contract binding for borrowers to manage. Tuition prices are locked with student loan availability. The standard of living needed for a fresh financial start is unrealistic for borrowers. Whether borrowers are stoic in prepay, pay slowly, expect forgiveness, are illness bankrupt, or are retired, the standard of living for a fresh start requires them to continue to live skimpy, like they did in college. The education department is making borrowers fall through unpoliced bad servicing as education aid. Freeloading. Middle class borrowers are expected to resolve the student loan gambling addiction without resources. Not many want to hear borrowers whine about any feature of their student loans. Borrower overspending myth. The average loan balance does not cover tuition for 4 years or Ivy League educations. So, private loans are needed because tuition keeps rising and other expenses keep rising. Since some borrowers have out of state expenses because of merit aid marketing, and schools aren't upfront about those expenses, borrowers get a reputation for overspending. Borrowers become primed to borrow to cover surprise expenses. Excruciating tithe challenge. For borrowers who are earnest about tithing, the loss of this budget will pain them. The standard of living for a fresh financial start allowed Christian clergy to be overcome by profiteers. Christian borrowers need to save 10% for a house, 10% for retirement, since pensions have been lost to the middle class downward spiral, and give a 10% tithe. The Constitution spoke on Christians and other faiths' behalf through bankruptcy protection. Today's borrowers are America's most ambitious, best, and brightest. Areas with upward mobility have greater participation in religious groups. Borrowers must pay tuition over their entire working lives and also after. The student loan swindle plays on graduates' emotional need to provide the best life for their families that they can, every family member possible. Borrowers must save up for their children's higher tuition while they pay their loans back and while they help their elderly parents adjust to elder care demands. Love. Love does not care about student loan payments, taxes, careers, location, democracy, or convenience. Student borrowers no longer try to delay starting a family with a beautiful love until they pay off the loans. Bankrupt but educated young children will be bankrupt too. They will only see how borrowers cope with constant spending pain, more credit. When the new generation falls, the unraveling will keep them from trusting governments, a loosening of their bond with their neighbors. Low payment hell. Borrowers who have a low enough income to pay nothing put off payments for decades because the debt never ends. The human mind responds when we've held heavy things too long, physically and emotionally. You are your brother's keeper. Tuition for doctors and dentists still rises. The United States Constitution established long ago that we are our brother's keeper. We need doctors and dentists to keep us. Unforgettable pain. Borrowers will always look back on the years of prolonged payments as a tough time in their lives that they endured, even doctors. Even borrowers who attend MIT or Wharton will be increasing their credit management expenditures by hiring credit management experts. A high salary is no buffer. More money, more problems. Anyway, even an outlier borrower who finds a way to pay high debt off in 1 year will have opportunity costs unique to each borrower, on top of the loss of retirement savings for each borrower. With unrelenting debt for life, borrowers have to navigate America's pattern of war, inequality, high personal debt, low savings, threats to the U.S. paying back national debt, global economic changes, and infamous congressional fights, and not tune out. Student loan law ignorance. Whether the borrower is 18 or 42, the borrower is unlikely to know student loan law. The Education Department ignores their specific laws by failing to police the program. Then they advise courts to rule in their favor since few know student loan law. Unchecked conflict of interest. Getting educated enough to understand student loan law comes after borrowing. Incompetence on student loan law adds to borrowers' expenses and borrowing risks. Criminals. Given the Education Department's absolute power to garnish without a court order, there should be no appearance of impropriety by a student loan seller. Colleges. There should be no crime that involves colleges and the Education Department in any borrower's life. The Biden administration decided to bolster school oversight using secret shoppers for financial products to crack down on crime, for example, fraud, to improve student outcomes. Infamous legislators. Borrowers have inherited congressional brinksmanship in America's Hunger Games. America's elections have become compromised and questionable, with electronic voting and shadow funding fears by all parties. Congress intentionally withholds constitutional and statute of limitations protections from borrowers while funding university welfare in ever increasing amounts. Nasty reneges. Borrowers face, at all times, a congressional or education department renege on their federal student loan contracts in devastating ways, like making removal of constitutional protections retroactive in 1998. Even during the COVID moratorium on repayment, those close to paying their loans off were put in a confusing position. The moratorium changed the false market again. Hearings are no longer a guardrail against unfounded administrative wage garnishments, a lost consumer protection. Interest rate gamesmanship. Congress plays around with borrowers' interest rates like a casino. No interest needs to be charged and legislated, ever. In the American Hunger Games, creditors waste money for the borrower's lifetime when payments never amortize the loan because of wage garnishment, low wages, forbearance, IBR, forgiveness plans, income contingent plans, and stagnant wages. Congress's political prisoners. The Education Department has become dark because good men and women won't end rising tuition. With no formal complaint system at the Education Department, and with proof of fraud and gambling, there is ample appearance of impropriety that our infamous Congress refuses to fully resolve. Draconian student loan laws. Regulations, guardrails, that fully govern the department's $1.7 trillion bet were never created, or never implemented, or never followed. And there's no plan B. Courts are prejudiced against borrowers. Boycott power has scared the Constitution out of student loans. Government disinformation power has scared the Constitution out of student loans. Constitution in the way. America is exceptional because our Constitution is a right document and easy to interpret wisely. Justice cannot confer a higher moral standing to creditors in the context of student loans and still comply with the Constitution. The student loan program's governmental harassment happens in borrowers' living rooms and offices for their entire lives. Punishment. Americans have developed a constantly fearful mindset manipulated by unscrupulous politicians and grifters who gamble with students' educational investments, like the endowment restrictions. Freedom is a fearless mind. Higher education funding has now dulled our American brand using fear for profit. The American dream of a beautiful life requires full constitutional protection. Legal industry is inaccessible, little pro bono. The middle class suffers as laws swing in favor of lenders and corporations, profiteers. Lawyers failed to champion the Constitution on behalf of the middle class in court so that borrowers could easily manage to pay their student loans back using no more than a waiter's summer salary. The most accessible lawyers, bankruptcy attorneys, will not take student loan cases because of the requisite adversary proceeding, cost of trial, and time spent writing briefs for people who can't pay them and the experts. Student loans are a punishment for having no money for tuition payments that steadily rise for those trying to keep the American dream polished. Lawyers relinquished their power. Without opposing counsel, prosecution rates, proof of regulatory oversight, against crimes by large financial institutions has fallen to a 20-year low. There should be 2 lawyers for every student loan borrower now, since the educated but bankrupt have so few protections. Lawyers fail to check and balance poor regulating. Lawyers are at the center of enforcing regulations as officers of the court. Lawyers lost their teeth in the American Hunger Games. They are borrowers too. Not using every resource to enforce regulations leads to bad organization of government. So, Borrowers remain vulnerable to adversity, a permanent damage that provides the foundation for a $1.7 trillion bet. False market. New slavery form. Federal student loan slavery fits squarely within the multiple definitions of slavery: absolute power over life, fortune, and liberty of another, in the form of a civil relationship. Slavery exists even when a citizen willingly sells freedom to the government. The loan servicer marriage to a borrower, with an unwaived and abused conflict of interest, is slavery without bankruptcy protection to balance the draconian nature of the student loan business model. Impotent American presidents. No American president is in office long enough to be able to properly help borrowers. Now, the fight for access to education is a fight for control of government. Colleges and universities impact who will teach and where America will find our presidents. Lobbyists. Lobbyists are paid to use strong sway. Borrowers do not have access to lobbyists with strong enough sway. Money. Lobbying incentivizes grift. Lobbyists help disappear the Constitution from student loan consumer protections. Marching has barely made a dent. When the student loan borrowers marched in small number, they got their way in small ways. Marching drives up the cost of loans. Borrowers who march risk their job security for appearing on the news or on Facebook for getting arrested. Any reason can be used in a perpetual employer's market.